Well, good evening. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. WeatherBrains, episode 978. The pre-show. This is for the 14th of October, 2024. Pre-show is the magical part of the program where we do three things. We share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and on occasion, we say some outrageous things. So the show begins here in about 8 minutes. If you want to watch the actual beginning of the show, just move the slider over about 8 minutes. So um, I need to go on a good rant. I think everybody's ready to go on a good rant here tonight. Everybody's just in the mood for a good rant. Um, so I made the mistake of talking to some media people about the hate we've been getting here the past few weeks. Bill, that was a mistake.
Only amplified the hate, huh?
Well, no, what it is, and I know this, and I get so busy I don't have time to think things through sometimes. So most news outlets are partisan. And it is what it is. If you want to watch the left wing side, go to MSNBC and CNN. You want to watch the right wingers, go to Fox. And again, my disclaimer is I can't stand politics. I have no interest in it. None. Zero. I don't think about it. I vote. That's it. So I did a few interviews and they turned it into a political activist thing to make me look like I'm a political activist on one side or the other. And gosh, that's just dead wrong. This has nothing to do with politics. In my opinion, of course, everything, my left shoe is political, but now I guess everything's political. But I've had equal amounts of hate from right wingers and left wingers, equal, which maybe I'm doing it right when you get equal amounts of hate from both sides. Um, but it's
It's just
like,
sad, James. It's just sad, the
I
state of our country.
I got one from the New York Times yesterday, and I sent them. I wrote a piece on Substack, which is a nice little writing platform. If you want to, it's not Facebook, it's not open social. Well, it is open social, but I don't know. You feel safer by putting it up over there. So I wrote a piece on Substack about it, and I'm sending all these reporters, tell them you can use anything you want to over there, go for it. But I think I'm just done talking about it because it does amplify it. But what's bad is that they make you look like a political activist by commenting on the amount of hate and insanity that we've been receiving here over the last few weeks. And I just hate that. I'm not a political activist. Again, I don't care. I'll vote. That's it. Um, and so that's just not cool. It's not cool. They want to make you a pawn in their game to aid their political candidate. And what happened to journalism? It used to be journalists
Right.
would ask both of these candidates hard questions. They would just brutally come after both of them, which is the way that it ought to be. But now you've got most of these journalists, these organizations, where they're promoting one candidate and they're trying to destroy the other one by biased news coverage. And this is so you got your right wing channels and you got your left wing channels. And to try and get an inkling of what's going on here, you got to dip your toe in both to try and gauge what's true and what's not true.
Right.
And that's crazy.
It
And I
takes a
don't
lot
know
of
what
time and a
happened.
lot of effort, too.
I don't know what happened to journalism along the way. And of course, everybody says, "Oh, we're straight shooter. We're fair and balanced, straight shooter, straight." No, you're not. I mean, anybody with any lick of sense that's not hung up in this stuff can watch a channel or look at a publication, and you can tell right away which side they're on. And maybe that's the only way to get an audience these days. I don't know. Maybe if you're a straight shooter, you don't get an audience. I don't know. And it's kind of that way in weather. So I'll throw up a TikTok video, and I don't dance and I don't cuss and I don't do that stuff. But and I get some good engagement over there. I've had some TikTok videos that have done 1 million views, but you get these jabronis. Hey man, I'm a sailor, and I know about the Gulf Stream, and I know about the warm water. They're not telling you this. This thing's not going to weaken by the time it gets to Florida, man. It's going to be the worst hurricane ever, and when it gets over in the Atlantic, it's going to destroy Savannah and Charleston. Millions and millions and millions and millions of views for this knucklehead. But, you get a professional meteorologist, nobody watches. And maybe that's the same thing in journalism. Maybe if you're a straight shooter and you do it right, nobody watches. I don't know. But anyway, that's my rant of the evening, and I'll stop talking about it because we don't need a high blood pressure situation here.
Well, it's too bad. Too bad Jen and Kim missed the rants.
No, they didn't need to hear that. If you want to, y'all can hear the rant. You can go back and watch the replay later. But anyway, for those, and listen, what I did for a lot of these journalists, I told them go watch last week's episode when Kim McLean got on here, and what she said that made more sense than anything else. She delivered what we were all trying to say beautifully. And go listen. I told them all, go listen to last week's WeatherBrains. And the truth is, it's a social science problem anyway. It's not a physical science problem. They ought to be talking to Kim to start with. So, but anyway, I'm done with my rant.
Were you getting? Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask, were you getting a whole lot of media attention the past week? People wanting to know from your perspective what's going on with the disinformation and all of that?
Oh, it was everybody. BBC, France, all the, New York Times, all these people wanted to talk about it. And I got a little sideways because what they do, they will take this topic and they will make it a political thing where they make me a pawn in their political game. And all these outlets are promoting a certain political candidate. And I should have known that. I should have known not to get involved in it because the hate was just brutal today over, I don't know what it was. I think it was MSNBC and how they portrayed me. And you just can't win when you do these interviews sometimes. So,
well, I've only looked at your like a Twitter feed of mentions of you in the last few weeks a couple of times, and both times it was way out in left field, James, which is way different than it usually is. Just crazy stuff I'd never seen before. So
yeah,
terrible.
But if I show up some political candidate's
comment
ad, oh geez, it's is there any way we can do anything in this world without being political and just invoking this stuff? I
don't think so anymore. It's awful.
Again,
we're going over the waterfall. It's all over with.
Yeah, pretty much.
And I saw your TikTok today, James. I watched your TikTok where you're reaching out and your little clips that you threw, like this guy and this guy, and you're trying so hard.
The more you try, it just deteriorates the whole thing. And
yeah,
and I think the best thing I did was write that Substack piece, which just kind of explains the whole situation. And I'm just gonna be like Forrest Gump. That's all I got to say about this because we've got to carry on here. I'm here to do weather. I'm not here to, And I thought the Rolling Stone thing was okay. I talked with him. I will say, I've always wanted to tell my mama that I made the cover of the Rolling Stone.
Dr. Hook and James Fan.
And see, most people have no idea what that song is, but
I do.
For those that are not old, there was a song by Dr. Hook in the medicine show called "The Cover of the Rolling Stone." Yeah, you can go play that, and but I thought they did a pretty good job with it without politicizing the whole thing. But
well, they were behind a paywall. I can't ever read what they write, so I need to always get. I guess it might be on my Apple News. I need to look and see.
All right. So welcome to our television viewers. It is the top of the hour. So let's see. Are we all here? Do we have a guest this evening?
We got Father Potter over there. That's all I need.
Yay!
Oh, okay.
Hi, Ron.
I see him. Can you hear us okay, Sean?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Well, I'm liking that library back there. Between he and Troy, I don't know who's got the bigger library.
No, I'm jealous.
I'm not sure he'd want to hear us, Sean and Rand.
Books a million. All right, let's get this thing. Let's get this thing going. All right, track 1 and track 2, and here we go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
You're listening to WeatherBrains. They're kind of a big deal.
Hey, Bill Curtis. Thank you. Welcome to WeatherBrains, episode 978, the weekly show that's all about weather for weather geeks, dweebs, nerds, dorks, weenies,
and other names.
You're here. This is for for the 14th of October, 2024. Let's just go right up to the Arctic Circle. Jen, thank you. We're gonna get frosty down here this week. Thank you.
You're welcome. 47 right now here, and we're down to 38 tonight with a little rain. And then tomorrow night, I think we get our frost here, and then again, get even colder Wednesday night. Looks like below freezing. So yeah, it's here. Feels like fall. Blew in yesterday and had the windows open. It was just, I love watching a front come in and it goes from the 70s to the 50s all of a sudden. The wind's blowing. It just feels good, smells good. So you're welcome.
And feels good, smells good is a great show title possibility here. Right off the bat. Troy, I don't.
Yeah, you just move on. You don't need to come down here. No. Believe me. Yesterday we saw 101 at Camp Mabry. That's the latest 100-degree temperature ever at that climate site, which goes back to the late 1800s, latest during the fall, also a daily record. And we set new records at both Bergstrom and Camp Mabry today. And if with any luck at all, highs around 80, maybe by Wednesday or Thursday, some of that cooler air after Jen has taken advantage of it and it comes on down, what's left of it. We get a little bit of that. I may see some upper lows actually in the upper 40s around here by Wednesday night, Thursday morning.
Yeah, we've got a station down in McAllen, down in the lower valley, and I'm forecasting a high of 84 for them here in a couple of days. That's like a cool way. Break out the jackets and sweaters. So let's go to our official National Weather Service voice of Norman. Ooh. Rick Smith. Rick, how are you going to do with this cooler air? What you got coming?
We're loving it. I mean, high was 73 today in Norman. We've got highs in the 60s and 70s the next 7 days, and frost and freeze warnings or advisories for parts of the state. So bring it on. Let's keep it for a while. Love it.
Awesome. Well, let's go over to your neighbor, Kim. First off, your voice sounded great last week. You recovered quickly. Sounded really good. So you must be back at 100%.
I think so, and I'm very grateful to be back at full capacity. Reporting from the other side of Norman, I can say I'm feeling very similarly to Rick, and I love that fall is here. The 70 to 50 range is just such a beautiful spot, and I feel like Oklahoma doesn't get to spend a lot of time there. So as Rick's shaking his head, so we're going to just really soak this week up as much as we possibly can. It's going to be great.
Yep. I'm kind of a 60s, 40s guy, but 70s and 50s are good. And I agree where we are. It's the same problem we have here. Let's see. James ate a lot up in Tulsa. You're kind of in the same boat, I guess.
You bet. 73 today and probably down to 34 or so in town tomorrow night. But we'll have some 20s in the viewing area. And It pivots hard. We were 91 on Saturday.
Wow. All right. So it looks like Dr. Jacobs is fishing. So Bill Murray, let's bring in our guest. Let's go. Let's rock and roll. Shake and bake.
Yeah. James, tonight's guest WeatherBrain is no stranger to the show. He is a certified consulting meteorologist, certified broadcast meteorologist, strong focus on weather history, which makes him near and dear to my heart. Weather historian and author known for his book, Too Near for Dreams, The Story of Cleveland Abbey, America's first weather forecaster. We had him on after that book came out. He also writes Retrospect, a regular feature for WeatherWise magazine, which highlights notable weather events and their impacts in history. John Potter, welcome back to WeatherBrains.
Well, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
It's always great to talk to you. And in this month's edition of WeatherBrains, you have an article about a project that is near and dear to my heart, and that is about cracking the code that the U.S. Weather Bureau used back in the late 19th century, early 20th century. We want to dig into that tonight because I'm very fascinated by this subject and excited to have you come on and talk about it. So tell us a little bit, though, about what's going on with your family up in Minnesota.
That's right. I think so.
Catch us up a little bit.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I've got to give my numbers here. It was a high of 57 today in central Minnesota to the St. Cloud Airport, and just not too far from about 10 miles or so east of where I am right now. And very nice fall day, but we've got a freeze warning in effect. So the forecast low here tonight to tomorrow morning is 30, which I believe is going to be the first sub freezing if we get down there that we've had this season so far. So yeah, fall is definitely here in Minnesota. I hear all you talking about the warmer the warmer weather where you are, but that's the way it is here. And no, it's great to be here. As some of you know, Minnesota is what I consider my home state. I grew up here, moved here just before kindergarten with my family, and went to undergrad at St. Cloud State University, got my bachelor's in meteorology there, and then moved all over the country, Arizona for on-air job, Indiana for grad school, South Carolina for when the Southeast Regional Climate Center was there. It's now up in North Carolina. Maryland, DC area, New York City, working for ABC News Good Morning America, and then back to the DC area working for the federal government for 15 years, first for the National Weather Service headquarters in Silver Spring in their Office of Communications, and then I jumped ship and went over to NASA, which had a pretty big day today with the launch of Europa Clipper. But kind of split my time in between both, about 8.5 years in NASA for, I think, just a hair shy of 7. So, and then about 2 years ago, decided that it was time to, let's just call it early retirement. And my wife and I made the decision that this is where we wanted to settle down, and made our way back to beautiful central Minnesota, be close to family and raise our son, Ethan, be happier. Back in what Paul Douglas calls the Super Bowl of weather.
I'm still trying to figure out how you can get a meteorology degree from a university with cloud in the name. I think that's fantastic.
You should get some bonus for that, I think.
Yeah.
Well, Sean, as many times you've been on the show, I don't think you've ever walked through your whole resume like that. No. I think I learned a lot just in that 3 or 4 minutes there. That was pretty cool.
That was the executive summary.
Yeah, that was pretty good. I like that. You've had some cool experiences there along the way, including Yuma, Arizona. But I don't know that we ever asked you, and I'm sure we did. I didn't go back and listen to several shows you've been on. But what got you interested in weather to start?
Well, that's a great question. Like a lot of folks, and I think several folks here, I've even heard can give the story of their so-called origin story as a meteorologist or weather geek, weather nerd. Mine has to do with a big weather event. I'll start by saying I was always interested in science. My mom was in the medical field. She worked in a lab at a local clinic, and she majored in science in college, and really kind of fostered that interest in me from a young age, taking me out to show me the stars and constellations and nature, had me do my first scientific study of ground squirrels when I was probably about 6 in our backyard, which we had in our backyard at the time. So I was very interested in science, got that from her. And then my dad, who was in education teaching and primarily English, he taught English the post-secondary level, and so I think I get my love of language and words and writing from him. So it's a good combination. And then probably in junior high, actually in high school. High school is really when I think I started getting interested in weather meteorology. And actually, maybe it was like probably around 8th grade, because I think I was about 13 or so, dating myself here, and this actually goes back in not long after he started working at the NBC affiliate in Minneapolis, St. Paul. It's now KARE 11 in summer of '86, and there was a tornado. I'm sure some of you are familiar with this one, the so-called Ridley Brooklyn Park tornado that touched down just before the 5 o'clock newscast. And I remember I was home. It was summer. Of course, I was watching TV, like Three's Company or something, you know what, and it was ending. And just as they all started reporting about a funnel cloud being sighted just north of downtown Minneapolis, some of the northern suburbs, and I started flipping around, and lo and behold, Paul's station happened to have a helicopter coming back from assignment, and the helicopter pilot, still remember his name, Max Mesner, don't recall his name, but did an outstanding job of capturing this aerial photography of the tornado on the ground. It was made for TV, and this was, really before the age of kind of the ubiquitous cameras now, and so having this, especially aerial footage, that happened right as the 5 o'clock newscast unfolded, was just amazing. So my parents had just gotten recently their first VCR, and I remember I popped a tape in, pressed record, had it on Paul's channel 11, and just was mesmerized. And it was wall-to-wall coverage at its finest. I heard that the Weather Service, it was, among other things, you saw the whole life cycle of the tornado going, into like rope stage and condensation funnel, and then reforming. And it was mostly over, as I recall, we're popping left and right, but very little damage to property, thankfully, as I recall. So I was really interested in that, and that I think I really attributed that experience to sort of focusing my interest on weather. And then when I was in high school, just before I started college at St. Cloud State, they started a meteorology program. So this is the first and still the only Minnesota. I think you'd have to go to Iowa State or Wisconsin or North Dakota State would be the closest. It was kind of a no-brainer then. I decided, hey, I'm going to, from before I registered as a freshman, I was going to major. The folks here can attest. It's not as easy as that, but I made it through, and that's kind of the
most damage was somebody realizing that you recorded over their soap operas. Was that?
Well, I think one of the first things we recorded was my sister wanted to watch the Charles and Diana wedding, and so luckily I didn't grab that tape. But
Sean, that video, I mean, I can just see it in my head right now. I use that probably in the Grizulis videos, like I mentioned in the chat. But when I first started doing impressive tornado videos, that there was so close up and from a helicopter, it was so unique. But yeah, very famous video.
It was, and Paul's, in the studio coverage was just, just bar none, just excellent. I remember I think he, or maybe it was they should probably find the link, and they have all this stuff online now, and they said we're basically throwing the script out the window. We're gonna, I remember Paul Douglas a couple of times saying, folks, I'm flying by the seat of my pants here, and we're getting bulletins from the Weather Service, reading them off. Of course, these were very, by today's standards, crude, primitive graphics, showing the Doppler on the chroma key and so forth. But he delivered, and kept people safe and informed, like you wouldn't really never before.
Well, we always have to tell the requisite story, and we'll keep it short, Sean. But I met you. We ended up trading probably, I don't know, I think the number I remember is about $1,200 in a parking lot of a Washington DC hotel for your entire collection of WeatherWise magazines that I think you had bought for like $6 the week before. It's probably the greatest profit in American weather history.
Way to go, Sean.
Yeah. Well, a couple of things about that, Bill. One, I think you might have over and under inflated those numbers a little bit. I think I paid a little more than
they get further apart.
Right. I think I paid a little more than we were both on the same list. Remember this back when he had listservs, and he was clearing out back to the, maybe at least not the fleet collection, but I did get it from him for a song basically. And then you had reached out to him after he already promised them to me, and as I recall, like begged him to at least he wouldn't renege on the deal with me, but you at least got him to give tact, and you started emailing me and saying, well, here, you paid like, maybe it was like $40 or something. I'll give you $100. I vaulted that, and this, I'm a resource. I'm going to hold on to this. And so you just kept up in the ante. And no, it was, I believe the final pot sweeteners, I think you called it, was, you got up to like 500-600. And I was starting to, think, am I being foolish here? And then 8, 9, and then finally you said 1,000. It was an even grand. So you said 1,200 a minute ago. I think you owe me a couple hundred.
All right, I'll pay it. It was gladly the best.
No. In all seriousness, so you did that one back in like 2002 or 3 or something. And we met in the, I always like to embellish the story a little bit because it sounds like a plot from some spy movie parking lot of some hotel in suburban Washington, D.C. The back of the open up the trunk of the car, and I've got boxes of magazines. And you're there with your buddy who's just like shaking his head in disbelief.
Yeah, we didn't know whether to trust you, and you didn't
trust us.
And,
we made the transfer. Here are the goods, and then you handed me a stack of cash. Looked, put in my pocket, got in the car, and drove off as fast.
Well, Sean, you got to admit this is the most legitimate deal that ever happened in a DC hotel parking lot in history. So,
it wasn't the Watergate, but it was. And then later on, so somebody, I guess I'll have the last laugh, because what happened is, I eventually was able to reconstruct. It took me years, but to reconstruct the collection and complete it, as did you, Bill. Thanks, large. And then a lot of it was, some of you may know Bill is up in Asheville. Lived in Asheville as the director of what's now NCEI, was National Climatic Data Center in CDC, and NCC, National Climate Center, I think, before that. And he was director in the late 60s, I think. And I got to know him through CCM activities and NCIM, which I served as, which is now ACM, several many years ago. And he was clear. He sent me boxes and boxes. So I was able to kind of build up my collection again. But then I had duplicate copies. And what did I do? I remembered Bill's sweet deal, and I reached out to him and said, "Hey, Bill, you looking for some more issues of WeatherBrains?" And that might be where the 1,200 came in. I don't know. I made enough to like buy a new digital camera or something. No, it's a great story. Yeah.
The police staking out that parking lot, actually trying to find something nefarious going on, and there's the ultimate nerd swap happening.
Oh yeah. And then I think, Bill, we each have a complete collection now, and then there was sort of this running contest of who's going to get issue volume 1, number 1. Was it February 1948, which there were very few printed of, and somehow we both managed to do it. I think
I got Lourdes Avila. She found it for me. A museum in Vermont, a museum or something.
She broke into the glass exhibit case.
She got the March.
I'm going to have a talk with Lourdes.
The original, and that episode indebted to her for that. And I treasure my collection. I will never part with it for any amount of money. And appreciate you helping me get it. So anyway, we always say that story's going to be
it was worth it just to have this friendship now, and
there's no question. But along the way, I came to realize there was this code that the Weather Bureau used, Sean, and you've just written about it very exhaustively. Talk about what inspired you to write about it first.
Sure. Well, if you read the article, and we've got it right here. This is it's actually made the cover. It's only the second time I've had I guess you call it a cover story in Weatherwise, but it's a feature article in the September-October issue called "Cracking the Weather Code: How Early Weather Observers Used Encryption to Communicate Information." And if you read this article, you might think that I was inspired to write this after this idea of a weather code that the Weather Bureau, in the late 19th century, a little bit into the early 20th century, came to the forefront of the news about a year ago. when I know NOAA had it on their website, Weather Channels featured it. There was a woman, and I actually mentioned this at the end of the article, and I'll get to in a minute why that is. There's a woman in Maine, Sarah Rivers Cofield, who purchased a dress in an antique mall in Maine in 2013, discovered these little slips of paper in these hidden pockets inside the dress that had these kind of crazy notes scribbled on them, handwritten, and they were clearly some kind of code. And so she was really curious as to what these were and started posting on some cryptology websites, and people were these code breakers. It's a whole culture of this, and they were people were going nuts trying to figure this out. And it really wasn't until this professor in in Canada, in the University of Manitoba, who searched through nearly 200 different code books, found a clue to the answer in an 1880 publication called Telegraphic Tales and Telegraphic History, a popular account of the electric telegraph, its uses and outgrowths. And I guess it had a reference in there to the Weather Bureau's use of this weather code. So in a way, that would have been a great inspiration, a great way to kind of get me interested in the story. But like you, I knew about this long before this, and believe it or not, I actually wanted to write this article for probably close to a decade. I had notes, I had copies of the weather code book, the instructions, and everything, and thought this would be a great feature article for WeatherWise. And when I was working my former day job or jobs in the government, I really didn't have a lot of free time because I was doing the retrospect, just past 20 years of that, by the way. So it's been now 21 years that I've been writing for WeatherWise, and first thing I wrote was a feature article on the Wright brothers for the centennial of their first flight. So that was in 2003. And then shortly thereafter, I pitched the idea of retrospect column, which, as I like to put it, explores the intersection of weather and history, and had to do that. Have been doing that ever since for the past 20 plus years. So very little time until to do these on the back burner, and pitch the idea to Margaret Schmidt, like you've had on the show, and the managing editor, and she said this is more research than I did, because there are a lot of kind of nuances to this story, to some of the historical sources, and but kind of why I didn't start with the dress story. I wanted to include it, but I felt like that had been covered so much in the popular press. I had to make kind of looking under the hood of what that story introduced, and what was the nitty-gritty of this concept of using a cipher code, I think in some cases there were several variations. In some cases they were just purely random words, but then later on there was sort of a systematic element to it, an actual key to use to decipher these, and how that evolved, how it benefited them, because at the time these weather observers scattered across the country had to send their observations several times a day via telegraph. And telegraph relies on Morse code, so it's lots of dots and dashes to make up letters, to make up words, and it's a lot easier to have. I'll just use the example that's in the opening of the article here. Error library gumbo ensign for just seemingly random words is a lot easier to send via a telegraph than to say that it was a barometer reading of 30.04 inches, temperature of 78 degrees Fahrenheit, dew point of 72, wind from the east at 3 miles per hour, present conditions clear with a local prediction for the day of foul weather and a maximum temperature of 92 degrees Fahrenheit. All of that could be condensed into these 4 words: error, library, gumbo, and ensign. And it was, as much as I even read about this and trying to write it and not get too bogged down in the details, it is just kind of mind-boggling what these observers, and then the clerks at the central office in the Signal Service, and then later Weather Bureau Central Office in DC, had to commit to memory or be able to quickly look up to write these things down as they were, coming in on the telegraph receiver. So it's kind of a long forgotten, almost, part, almost footnote to weather history that I wanted to shed some light on.
Yeah. So, Sean, who came up with it? Because it seems simply brilliant. Today, who
I joke with my wife that all roads lead to Cleveland Abbey. I didn't necessarily expect to include him in this. And here's a picture that I found when I was doing research for the book. This one did not make it in the book, so it was kind of nice to be able to use this. This is Cleveland Abbey in 1867, just before he worked for what is now the National Weather Service. When he was, and about a year before he started as director of the Cincinnati Observatory. And that's where he initially came up with it. He came up with this weather cipher code that he distributed to his network of regional observers, upon whom he relied, and since that were really the first effort, and scientifically, systematically predict the weather in the U.S. at least. And then, not long after that is when February of 1870, Joint Resolution of Congress passed it, authorizing the Secretary of War to take weather observations points across the country, primarily the time at the Great Lakes and Eastern Seaboard, and issue warnings. And so that fell under the. And General Albert Meyer was the chief signal officer at the time, and he got to know Abbey. Eventually hired him along with some other civilians, increased Lapham, who was also very instrumental in this effort. But Abbey stayed on for about half a century and really helped develop, especially the scientific research components of the Weather Service in those early years. And so he took this code, this weather cipher that he'd started in Cincinnati, actually sent it to we're going to adopt this and modify it a little bit for use on a national scale. And then when Abbey came aboard in early 1871, just before, I guess, the first anniversary of the Joint Resolution, they sort of perfected that code, that version of the code, and ran with it. And then there were some additional changes made. And it was really in 1887 when there was a major change made. And as I mentioned earlier, it became more of a systematic type of effort where there was an actual key used. And that's where I think, Bill, I know we talked about this a little bit beforehand. If you're interested, I think we could try to do a little. Well, first of all, if anyone have some more questions, happy to talk about that. But we could try our little experiment that we discussed with the panel at some point.
Well, Troy would beat us all. It would just be embarrassing. It's probably worth it.
So Bill and I just Bill wrote to me just like a couple hours before.
Yeah, I gave him a good 45-minute warning.
Right. And
hey, Sean, let's play a game.
Let's play a game. Can you do this? And let's come up with some examples, and we'll break the panel up into teams, and we'll give them some basic guidelines, rules, and see who can decode these. And we'll give you some actual words from the actual weather code. This will be the 1887 version. And see who can come up with this. And so if you all are game, what I would do, and I came up with some examples. Don't know how well this is going to go, but what I would do is I've got one key page from that. It's a 95-page document. This publication, this 1887 United States Weather Code is called, and there's one page in particular that's got a couple tables on it, and I can share it with y'all right now through the chat, I think. And do I have that do I have that ability? No, I don't. I'd have to send it, upload it from my computer. It says file, upload. I guess I could email too, but
Sean,
I could upload it to Google Drive.
I got a question for you, Sean. I mean,
yeah, go for it.
We joke, I'm good. I'm pretty good with the METAR stuff. But the thing about this, that tells you what everyone code. This code is, there was no real key probably other than where this document you found, right?
Yes. And I remember, having to try to decode METAR, and especially in college synoptic meteorology classes. And no, I mean, unlike there where you just have to kind of know, okay, there's this long string of characters, alphanumeric characters, and this position, maybe you drop the leading, whatever, like the leading digits from the barometer, or if it's below zero, whatever, and you'll know what, but the answer's right there. No, this is like that, but it's coded. It's like as if it's, and that's kind of the hook that I started the article with, is it made it sound like somebody's typing away this encoded message as if it's like part of a spy novel, or it's like in the Civil War. But it's just for efficiency's sake, because they had to pay for it. They charge by the letter, and the more words or letters, characters you sent, the more expensive it could be. Not to mention more time consuming, and there's more, I think, possibility for error. If you're sending like numeric values, and you say, was that a whatever 43 or 48 or something, and so having these unique words, and actually I shouldn't say unique, because a lot of further complicate things, a lot of these words are used for more than one type of thing. So the same word that tells you what the pressure and temperature is might also, in another situation, maybe not in the same set of observations, but in another situation, might tell you, something about the wind speed or state of the weather or clouds. There are little exceptions to there are a lot of rules, and then there are exceptions to the rules. But it's fascinating to like read through this document, and that let me actually got it open here, but that you could see, for example, that for a clear sky with no precipitation, the word is skunk.
Hey guys, the same thing as the METAR.
Right. You got to think like, why did they include that? Some of these are a little salacious, but you've got like, let's see on the same page here, you've got sickly means if it's and this is all for with the wind direction of northwest. So skunk would be clear, winds from the northwest, and no precip or a trace. And then it looks like sickly would be also winds from the northwest, present weather, rain, and 0.01 inch trace, just over a trace of precip. But then the thing that I found was interesting is, and these are all, we'll get to in a minute if we do this fun little exercise. It's all based on the consonants and the vowels and the different parts of the word. So, and you look at like the first syllable, the consonant in the first syllable, the vowel in the first syllable, the consonant in the second syllable, vowel in the second syllable, etc. And then, you can easily look that up if you find it, if you don't just know it off the top of your head. And the fact that they could come up with words, and that's why I think they have some that are just, really, in my opinion, out there in this code, because once they came up with the system for that sort of formula for creating it, they just went through the dictionary and just found words that fit that pattern. But there were a few cases where they could not find any word with S, and so where S would be the consonant that in this case for these elements would mean from the northwest, I think, for the wind, and then some of the other letters have to do with the precip or the present weather. But there were some words where you just couldn't come up, for example, a word that using these rules would give you winds from the northwest, present weather, rain, and 0.20 inches of precip. No word, and it would have begun with S because, like all the others in this section, no word in the English language, at least they could come up with that would describe that based on this set of rules. So there are a bunch of cases like this, and what they did is they just picked some random words that all start with the letter W, and just, or wizard means winds from the northwest, rain, and 0.36 inches. Words where they just, and it's got that all explained in here, where they had to just use these W words, and I thought that was really interesting.
Well, Sean, maybe you can just pop the key up on the screen here and give us a word and see how fast we can decode it. Everybody has either run to the wine cellar or declared themselves out of the competition. I'm not I'm not sure it's going to be a very
right. I could just yeah.
I want to try it. I want to.
Well,
see
another thing we could do is, if I could, I don't need to see y'all. I you know, you guys are all great, wonderful, beautiful human beings. But if there's a way for me to show, perhaps, yeah, I could just superimpose this on there, and you could do. Is that possible?
James will allow it.
We have allowed it.
He may say like
he may prohibit it.
If I click share, and let me find just the one.
While he's doing this, I cannot promise to be particularly brilliant or correct, but I can promise.
There you go.
That's all we can ask.
Show title.
Okay, so this is an actual page from the 1887 United States Weather Page 8, and there are two tables in here, and I reproduced them in the article, but I'll show you the original here, that show for these words how. I'll just try to give a brief explanation. We'll go through this. I'll go through an example with y'all, and then we can give you some if you want to try, or we can just go through some examples. But you see, the first table, it's all consonants, and it's not every consonant, so it's just certain consonants: B, D, F, G, M, N, R, S, T. And the second table are all the vowels: A, E, I, O, U, A, E, I, O, and then U or Y. So you, and then you've got these different columns that show you, so barometer, temperature, etc. You got tens values here: 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. Down for the vowels, you've got units values, and they're only even. So they rounded some rounding, I guess, 2, 4, 6, 8, and then 0. So if you've got something like the barometer reading or temperature, that's obviously expressed in numbers and digits. And using the combination of the consonant found in this table and the vowels found in this table, you could either encode or then decode what the barometer and temperature are, keeping in mind that, kind of like with METAR, you ignore the leading 29 or 30. These are in inches for barometer, 29 or 30. And then there's lots of rules about, if it gets up to 100 or if it's below 0, how that works, which we don't need to get into. But then if you're talking about direction of winds or clouds, they would be expressed looking for you to look for these letters, kinds of clouds. And then the same thing with over here with the vowels, with state of weather, character of sunset, and amount of clouds in tenths, not eighths like we're used to. But so let me give you an example. Start with I was going to do this in like 3 rounds. I'd come up with some examples of pressure and temperature for round 1. Then round 2 is going to be clouds, and round 3 direction of wind and state of weather. So, but just for simplicity's sake, let me start at least with giving you one. This is an actual word: Dundee. Dundee, like the city in Scotland, or the Aussie movie character.
Crocodile.
That's right. That's. Can I buy a
Or the awards that they gave away at Dunder Mifflin, weren't they called the Dundies?
I'm not sure. That sounds about right. That could be. Maybe that's what we could give away for. So Dundee, Dundee. What you would do if you were looking at barometer and temperature, you look at start with barometer. You take the D, and you see that it's 20, so it's a 20 something, and then the U down here is 0. So DU gives you, and then you'd have to put the decimal point in there, 0.20. In this case, the 29 or 30. So of course, in this case, would be 30.20, right? Inches. And then the temperature, you look at the second vowel or second syllable of that word, Dundee, DEE, and they have to have some, let's just say, superfluous letters to make it a word. So you don't worry about the N, and you don't worry about the last E. So you worry about the DU in the first syllable gives you the barometer based on these two tables, and then the temperature. So similarly, you go up to this first one, you say D, okay, that's a 2, that's a 20 something, and then E 4, so it'd be 24 degrees Fahrenheit, and that's at least how you would decode the barometer and temperature using this code.
Wow.
And that's a pretty easy example, but and let's see, I'm trying to remember, they did change the number of words, but let's just say it was like half a dozen different words expressing lots of different variables. So for example, I'll give you another example with clouds. This is a word you don't hear too often. Benum, B-U-N-U-M-B, benum is in there. And what that would express, I'll just kind of cut to the chase here, 4/10 cirrus from the southwest. And you would get that clouds here. So we look at kinds of clouds. B is cirrus, and then it says amount of clouds. That's 4 or 5/10 in this case. So if you're encoding and decoding it, I guess they would have to either know or just assume, make a huge difference in how are they going to use that value. And then the N of the first table, the top, in terms of direction of wind and clouds, is from the southwest. So benum would mean 4/10 cirrus from the southwest. Bugaboo. Bugaboo.
Question.
B-U-G. Yeah. There are no stupid questions, Kim, just stupid words.
Each letter can represent several different attributes. So B,
correct,
existing in a word, could refer to barometer or temperature, something you want 10, or the direction of the wind and clouds north, or the kind of cloud cirrus. How do you know which attribute? Is it that there's
you guess?
What's the key,
Kim? The code is very specific. It's saying, this element is, or there's several words, of course, like the example I read earlier, that would constitute a complete set of observations. And so the first word would always, I think, would be temperature. Let's just say it would be temperature and pressure. So if you see that, and then which element is going to come first in decoding that word. So it's there are some cases where maybe a word is only going to mean one thing, and I think, for example, if let me go back to let's see, if I go back to my let's see, I don't know if I can do that with you guys without stopping to share this, but for example, the word Johnson, for example, I think meant no precip at all somewhere. And so you see that, you might know, but otherwise that's where I was saying there's very specific rules that I wouldn't call myself an expert on this. You would have to spend a lot of time practicing this, and even then have the book, the code book, handy in cases where I'm sure after a while some of these folks just committed this to memory, and they might have said, oh yeah, Dundee, I know that's this, or they knew that the DU meant the 20 and so forth.
Oh, yeah,
I don't know,
thank you.
Does that help?
I absolutely think it would be just like Troy Kimmel, our Metar Slinger. Like you would get to the point where you would just be able to look at it, you'd get the words, and you knew exactly what it was, especially if you were positioned in the same spot over a period of time. There's going to be some climatical normals. Like, I'm sure that there's words that were part of the everyday vocabulary, and it just was a very strange vocabulary.
It was, and there were some things in the instructions, and I included some of this in the article that I thought were really interesting, that they would say things like to the observers that for example, if for example, if somebody used the wrong word, I said, if an observer failed to correctly encipher the observations or missed a word, he was likely to receive a letter from his superiors in Washington asking for a correction. And this is no joke. I mean, and the only reason I included this is because another project I'm working on, which we can talk about in a future show, and it sent me to the National Archives for several months right before leaving Washington D.C. And I was looking at like carbon copy letters from the it was at the time the Signal Service headquarters in DC to observers at various stations. And this wasn't what I was researching, but I found these and kind of kept copies of them because I thought this would be interesting if I ever write this article. But such was the case in March 28th, 1885, when the observer in Pensacola, Florida, Sergeant Michael McGarren, received a letter informing him that a recent error in his coded observations. Quote, the cipher word happened, but no word to express the amount of precipitation measured to this office. So they were pretty strict. I mean, this wasn't they expected folks to be able to know this and get it right, or or you'd hear from them.
That sounds like court-martial material, Troy Kimmel. So, Sean, this is fascinating. Thank you for sharing all that. I'm always drawn back to our, we've had three weather heroes in Alabama weather history. E.C. Horton ran the Weather Bureau in Birmingham from like 1917 to 45. Of course, our J.B. Elliott, was at the Weather Bureau from 57 to 89. And of course, spanned from 79 till forever, will be the third one. But I'm always wondering what Horton was doing and thinking, on this March 21st, 1932 big day. Was he going down to the telegraph office and sending his observation and getting all the other observations back? What were they doing at Weather Bureau offices around the country? Were they just sending observations one way? What was the process?
Yeah, it varied. I mean, so you're talking about the 30s, and it was different than it was, say, in the late 1800s. In the late 1800s, these local stations around the country, they were primarily observing, taking observations, sending them to the central office in Washington, and that's where like the maps were made. That's where the forecasts or indications, are going back to their first use of the term, probabilities were created. They weren't doing local forecasts for the beginning of the the Signal Service in the early days of the Weather Bureau. In the 30s, of course, they would have been. But even then, I'd have to go back and look specifically at what the responsibilities were like, and there were different kinds of offices. I was going to say not today they're a little more uniform, but of course, some of you recall, I know when I was in college, at least, we had an office in St. Cloud at the airport, and it was primarily, observation and looking at the radar, and it wasn't the same. It wasn't what they called at the time what a WSFO. It was a WSO, I think, Weather Service Office, were the smaller ones, right, that had kind of more limited responsibilities versus the WSFOs that actually did the forecasts on a more regional level, which time, of course, was in Minneapolis and now in Chanhassen after the modernization of the 90s. So, but getting back to your question, yeah, it would be kind of interesting to see what were they actually doing, and more specifically of like what I was reading to you of these letters in the archives of kind of what were people thinking and going through their heads. I had the privilege when I worked in communications office of the Weather Service, and as you may know, Bill, for a while I was actually based out of New York, so working for the headquarters in Silver Spring. I had kind of a special relationship with the forecast office, the New York forecast office, which is in Long Island at Brookhaven National Lab. And so I used to go out there and spend some time with them, and especially on some Ross Stickman, great guy. I guess you have him on the show, I'm sure. Rick, is Rick still here? Gary Conti was the Gary. I think is he retired by now? He was the WCM, and so they had these old books bound kind of like almost like ledger books. Some of them they had different purposes, but there was one called I think it was called Station Notes. And it was really interesting because this was just like, these weren't observations, these weren't like anything real official. They were just like kind of like the little, little notes that the folks at the office were taking. And it might be, and sometimes they had newspaper clippings, pasted in there. So what I did is I did this for them, but I've got copies myself of basically trying to archive these, and basically made a camera copy stand all these pages of several of these books. And it's just a treasure. I don't know what I'm going to do with it, but at some point I'd like to do something with some of these. And I do occasionally dip into it with, say, like the retrospect, because if I'm doing something, I have these copies of these Station Notes books, for example. Well, I think I got them after I wrote about Lindbergh, in this transatlantic flight. But there are things in there about Lindbergh coming to the office and, getting, when you get a briefing. Ames Kimball was one of the meteorologists of the New York office at the time, giving him some briefings, or going back to the March, some of the notes that they included about, like, say, an observer not being, somebody not being able to make it into the office, or, something like that. So you don't know how many of them survive. Like in the case of Upton, they've got them there locally still, and I think, as long as Ross has anything to say about it, they're not going to get rid of them because it's a treasure. I fear that in some cases, some of these offices have let their, as things have modernized, and people may not be as interested in the historical aspects, or they might have even sent some of it to, when I was at headquarters in Silver Spring, we or something, and it was all this like it wasn't quite what I just described, but it was like educational outreach material, including like 35 storm spotter training, film strips. And I thought this was interesting. LP records, of the NOAA administrator at the time, I think it was Richard Frank, I think it was the second administrator of NOAA, talking about watches versus warnings. And I guess they would send these to like local radio stations and they could play them. So I love this stuff. Unfortunately, yeah, it does take space to preserve and catalog and make it available. But that's again why, we owe so much to our friends in Asheville. And, I don't know if you all have had, Deke Arndt, who's the current director there. And, some of you may, like, I'm friends with him on Facebook, and seeing some of his posts after, the devastation that Helene brought is just heart-wrenching. But, in addition to knowing that he and his immediate family and others are safe, and it's how things fared at the center, at the federal building there. And I know he said, everything's, all the archives, the records are safe. It's going to take a while. I know for that, I don't know if it was storm related or not, that a trunk line got T1 line or something maybe got severed. I know it's back online, but if you still go there, ncei.noaa.gov, there's a disclaimer, a little banner at the top that says, hey, we're still dealing with the aftermath of this, and it's going to be a while before our services and products are back up to normal. The monthly state of the climate, for example, that's going to be delayed. And it's we talk about these things from, as we're coming on to the pre-show, talking about what forecasters do and getting the message out. And on the other side of that, at least specific to Asheville, is the wealth of.
Well, one thing you have a question is, I want to be that we're still ingesting data into Asheville. My question is, Rick might have some. There's a lot of data that every day is ingested.
I do know that NOAA has some. I don't know if it's for that purpose, but there's some sort of like a backup facility in West Virginia. Maybe okay. Rick knows a little bit more about that. But yes, that's something we don't, you don't want to lose that, because right. You can't rely on, expect the local forecast offices, once they transmit that out, that, they're saving these, whatever, terabytes, petabytes of, yep. data and everything. But I've got to think that, I wasn't, and certainly in my time at NOAA was not involved in that per se, but got to think that they've thought about these things and have some redundancy and some backups in place. I don't know Rick or even Kim, if you guys, anybody else knows, has anything
I
to add to
don't
that.
know for sure, but I'm like you. I have to believe that there's redundancy in there somehow, but I'm not familiar with that. If you know what that might be,
so.
I hope there is.
Bill, I know I interrupted you. Please.
Oh no, that was much more appropriate. I'm going to ask my last question than any of the other panelists, and I know Span may have a hard question over there before we tell open behind me. Here, I've been here for 3 weeks, and I've got 3 weeks to go, so I'm kind of tired of the place and ready for it to open. But I did see a couple of cool articles in the Birmingham News, the Birmingham Age Herald, about the code back in the day. Sean, how much of it was shared with the public, and was it just sort of a novelty? It seemed pretty indecipherable to the general public, but it seemed to generate some curiosity.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have some examples. That was one of the things I really enjoyed also researching and writing the article, was how the popular press, if you will, at the time, what they thought of that. For example, let's see, I have in here that for the clerks deciphering the messages, the work required acute attention to detail, a keen memory, and the ability to work quickly, given the, quote, crazy sounding combinations the weather code produced, as the son of the Baltimore Sun quipped in 1906. Few messages are alike, noted the Indianapolis. A large sheet is received at the Weather Bureau each evening shortly before 8 o'clock, bearing the reports in cipher of observations in various parts, quote, all the way down the page, and that the clerks deciphering the messages at the signal office in Washington, quote, talk each of them off without hesitation, except when the rare code not translatable at sight is reached. These are, I think, of those W words I was talking about earlier. And then if the translation is not accomplished after a moment's study, it requires but a few seconds. It's I don't know that the average person on the street knew about this, but certainly I think the folks, probably the folks in the press did, if they lived in a city where there was a Weather Bureau or Signal Service station, and they would go there to update some things, and so they probably were aware that this was happening, and that, at least in these cases, led to readers.
Well, James Fan, I could just imagine E.C. Horton walking down from his home, which was his Weather Bureau office in Fountain Heights, to the telegraph office in downtown Birmingham every day, and that just seems so crazy to me at this point, given all the technology we have at our fingertips, even though we're talking about vulnerabilities and weaknesses in the chat there. So can you even imagine that, James Fan?
No. How long of a walk would that be?
It would have been a heck of a walk. Yeah.
I mean, that's
maybe you drove a car, I hope.
Wow. Hey, Sean, I got a question about your career. So it's interesting to me that you dip your toe into broadcast, weather service. One that you enjoyed the
honestly,
most.
Jane, I enjoy definitely highlights from all of the the quote unquote day jobs that I had working on air. It was a great thing because I had that itch that from college and really take off as a full career. Weather service, got to work with some amazing people and do some amazing things, like I mentioned, working on some of these special projects with the folks in New York. NASA, incredible group of professionals there, both working being able to be one of the on-air talent for the 2017 eclipse, which I can't believe now has already been eclipsed, pun intended, with the one recent earlier this year. I remember 2017, it was my second year at NASA, and because I was supporting Earth science and the science mission director, and because I had the background in meteorology, they were putting together this eclipse broadcast coast to coast, but it's going to be anchored out of Charleston. And they said, let's tap Sean to tell us do the weather. And it was a great experience. That was definitely a career highlight. And believe it or not, got to use my CBM on the air for the first time. That's a story for another show. But when I had the seal, got that kind of as I was getting out of the on-air job in Yuma, and then but always kept it active. And then years later, when the CBM came along, thought, well, why not? All I got to do is go take a test, and I didn't have to send in more tapes, which was nice. So I got the CBM, but never got to actually use it until we did that eclipse broadcast. And but now doing the historical stuff and getting to write these things that I think are interesting. My wife jokes that some people say, like, with authors, write books or articles that they want other people to, or that they want to read. They write the books that they want to read. that aren't out there, which I believe in. But she says, you write the kind of stuff that you want other people to read or you think people should want to read. And I said, well, yeah, isn't that kind of, one and the same? But I think if I could have had like if there were a full-time job as the Weather Service historian, NASA has a chief historian and a whole history office at headquarters. They've got some of their other offices, Kennedy Space Center, Goddard have historians. The Weather Service and NOAA, other than maybe some of the folks in at NCEI in Asheville, there is no Weather Service historian. So when I worked there in the comms office, I sort of took that on. There's this heritage project, but but no actual like Weather Service historian. So if that were to be if that had been created, that would have been I think a dream job.
John Potter.
Well, we got some important people on the show here. I mean, come on,
That's
Kim.
right.
Kim's a commissioner.
But John, you write the kind of articles that I wish I had written.
Thank you. No, that's really a great compliment, Bill, especially coming from you. And yeah, you mentioned you as a commissioner for the AMS. No, I also have had the privilege of serving for several years on the AMS History Commission. I think I recently rotated off, but that's another great way because when I started out, and I wasn't interested in so much in history, the historical side of things, and that just somehow developed. And now I feel like there are all these great stories to be told, and there's not enough time to do it. And I'm working on this other big project now that I'm hoping will start to blossom in the next year or so, and we'll let you guys know about that if it does. Yeah, it's just great to be able to kind of unearth some of these stories and share them with a broader audience, such as yourselves.
Did you take writing in college? Because I didn't. I really regret that I don't have that skill set. How did you become a writer?
I kind of alluded to this earlier, talking about, my mom inspiring me in science, and, my dad being, an English instructor, and he majored in English and when he was in college, and very well read. I mean, both my parents were very well read, but my dad in particular, I think I got the writing bug from him, and so that was just something that I think I enjoyed and kind of came naturally and developed. I was over at my mom's house over the weekend. I found, and I have the files from college and looking at some essays that I wrote, like going on 25, 30 years ago. And it's interesting. I could get a little rough around the edges there, but it's just something I developed. And I've had people help me, mentors. Bob Henson, I attribute as credit as being, one of my mentors in the weather writing realm, because Bob, who I think you all know and have had on the show, out of Boulder, Colorado, I met him. I knew of him because I was reading WeatherWise long before I wrote for it, and he had a book on the history of TV weathercasting that I saw actually in the journalism library of my grad school in Indiana. I was in the geography department, but I was still interested in broadcasting. And so I knew of Bob, didn't know him, met him at my first ever AMS meeting in Orlando in 2002, was it? I think 2002, 2001, 2002. And he was also writing for the now defunct Weather Notebook. Do y'all remember that? The Mount Washington Observatory had this series. And so that's where I got, you kind of, people always say, you got to kind of start small and work your way up. So with Bob as sort of a guiding force, I submitted some short little scripts for some shows. And I think a lot of them were historically, related, themed to the Weather Notebook, and started doing some stuff for them. And then they, unfortunately, I think lost some funding and stopped production. But around that time, I decided I was going to try to start pitching stuff to WeatherWise, and it just kind of went from there. And then I always knew that I wanted to write a book. Bob had written a couple of books already, and I would see him, talk to him, pick his brain about that. How do I do this? What do I go about it? And eventually, had a couple of different ideas, and pitched one to to the AMS, which unfortunately is kind of gotten out of the book publishing business. But at the time, I was lucky enough that they were interested and able to publish the book on Cleveland Abbey. And I'll just put in a kind of a plug in the shameless self-promotion vein here that this Thursday webinar, it's like an author series that I'm going to be taking part in along with Jim Fleming, who has also been kind of a great mentor of mine. He's written many books articles on history of Weather Bureau and signal on Joanne Simpson. Martin of the University of Wisconsin in Madison, maybe not was well known, but we've gotten, it's great to have a biography of him now, Reginald Sutcliffe. And so the three of us are going to be on a little panel discussion talking about what it's like writing a biography of these three different meteorologists and sharing some of the process and challenges and giving advice to folks. So I encourage everybody or find them on social media. You can find the registration for the Zoom. It's going to be Thursday at I think it's at 7 Eastern. So, but yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, James. I don't know. It's just something I guess I was interested in, had a natural talent, and just developed. Did I take courses? Well, no more than I think was really required. You had to take a certain amount of high school, college, and but think about writing. It's sort of like somebody who's an athlete, and you have to, especially when I'm getting into a big project, I find that you have to kind of be in shape. You have to be in shape, the flow, the rhythm. So for example, if I'm like working on the book, that's like getting started on that, or doing the retrospect, a little warm up in a way to doing something major like that. That's a very more long drawn out process. But you've got to, just like an athlete has to stay in shape. If I don't think, for example, you can't just write a book and then write nothing else, and 5 years later down the road think you're just going to start writing another book. Whether it's for the popular press, whether it's for popular audiences or academic, I think it's something you just kind of always got to be doing to some extent to stay relevant.
Coach Saban said on Go Down Saturday, he said you can either feel the pain of discipline or the pain of disappointment, John. So that
the same goes for writing.
And then, Sean, one last request from me before we sign off. Please get Margaret to be on the show. We've never been able to get her.
I thought maybe you would have had her. Yeah.
No, we'd love to have Margaret. So please,
yeah, she's kind of elusive. So yeah,
she's been elusive for me for sure.
I will put a bug in her ear, as they say, and I don't know if she's going to be in New Orleans. I don't know how many of you all are going to be in New Orleans in January. I'm hoping to go. I've got hotel reservations already. I don't have any. Haven't gone farther than that, but if I go, this will be my first in-person AMS annual meeting since the book was published at the Centennial meeting in Boston in 2020 for various reasons. I was going to try to make it last year to Baltimore. We were going to do a little family, make a kind of have it coincide with a little family trip back to DC. First, we haven't been back since we left and moved to Minnesota, so we were going to go there. And I was going to just take the train up to Baltimore, but then my wife and son both got to New Orleans, and I know Margaret tries to make it to the AMS meetings, and so if nothing else, I'll try to buttonhole her there and get her a commitment.
That'll be great. We'll have a good dinner in New Orleans for sure.
There you go. Yeah, I'll look forward to that.
All right, we've got to take a quick break here. Bill, are you leaving now? Bill Murray?
Yeah, I am.
Good to go.
I've got an early day again tomorrow, so get this hotel behind me open and going. So thank y'all, Sean. Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Thank you, Bill. And be careful in those hotel parking lots. You never know what who might be.
Never know who you'll be
lurking back there. We're looking to make a deal.
Bill, do they have a waffle machine in there?
Oh yeah, we've got 2 of them, James. You'll be in hog heaven.
In fact, James ate a lot. Just wrote the same thing in the chat down here. He's testing waffle makers at 6 a.m. So that is my standard. My standard of where I'm going to stay here. Awesome. So, and Sean, if you can stick around for a few minutes, we have to break real quick, and we're going to. I don't see a report from Tony this week, but we got Jen this week in tornado history. We're going to come back, do an email. We'll talk about the current tropical situation and what happened last week. We'll talk about some of the communication issues if we have time. We'll do picks of the week and much more as WeatherBrains rolls along.
This week in tornado history, 2 tornadoes were confirmed in the state of Florida on October 19th in 1958. An F1 occurred in Sarasota County, and a stronger F3 moved over 20 miles through parts of Palm Beach and Martin counties. We look at the F3 in a summary at tornadotalk.com. For the Cloquet to near Pratt and then onward toward the Indiantown area, and much of the path was inaccessible. Here are some of the damage details from the Palm Beach Post from October 20th, 1958. This is all from the Pahokee area. They noted that 50 planes and their wheels were ripped off. There were 8 planes at the Glades County Airport that were completely destroyed. 2 others were noted as badly damaged, and another was reported missing. There was 1 fatality. Mr. John Gray, age 70, was with his wife in their home when the tornado hit. He was thrown from the home and found in a field.
All right. So it's time now to see if by chance, we have some email to read tonight.
We do. And I'm actually going to go through 2 emails, and one of them comes from some Troy Kimmel individual. We actually, Troy, I wanted you to talk about a little bit more about your email. You kind of alluded to one of your things earlier, but it was just generally about the topic of government weather infrastructure. And you had several examples. I just want
and I'm glad
Sean's
on the call with this because it's something that I'm concerned about, and it tied in nicely with Sean. I appreciate your response on NCEI because I worry about that because folks normally at night in the overnight hours, every ace out. And my question, what's happened the last few weeks? But one thing that's real important for the WeatherBrains viewers and listeners that are out there is to realize that weather observations, aviation weather observations, have not been since the mid-1990s, have not been under the purview of the Weather Service. OMB stepped in about the mid-1990s and decided they were primarily there for aviation safety. So the FAA had to basically take that over. Now, and some that are owned by a lot of them are owned by the FAA, but the equipment is maintained, by the way, by the National Weather Service, largely by WFOs. But the interesting thing is the communication infrastructure to those units is largely done. I love my friends in the FAA communication infrastructure, and their communications lines, these ASOS, is absolutely failing right now. I'll tell you, Orlando, Florida, and this is pre-Milton, by the way, lost the ability for their ASOS to even communicate long line weather observations. Their weather observers are putting these out basically on an iPad. They write down what's on the ASOS screen and sending it in. Manual observation out of Orlando, the biggest airport. If you look at Miami, probably tied. Shreveport Airport, a year and a half. There's a manual ob in Shreveport. One other one that I was on the phone with a friend in Alaska, but Barrow, Alaska, within the Arctic Circle, we lost that comms line a year or so ago, a year and a half ago. And if it weren't for the WFOs at Fairbanks, I'll back up and go to Shreveport and then back to I guess, Melbourne down in Florida. The only thing that's a saving grace for climate data is that the WFOs are dialing into these things every night and grabbing them for the climatological data. So I'm a little concerned what we're seeing in the FAA and their comm lines. I understand that they're there for aviation safety. We use them for climatology, but I'm telling you, the METARs at more and more sites, because of the lack of these FAA comm lines, are really being kind of throwing it at the FAA tonight. I have a lot of friends that work in the FAA, and I think it's a great agency. But I'll tell you, to let this go for as long as I have is unacceptable. I think it's going to end up affecting us in historical data at some point, and we kind of go from there, Jen. But that's what I was kind of talking about. And we're even getting in, I'm going to bring up one other one since it's right here. Some of you that followed the FedEx Southwest airline near miss here in Austin back in February 23, I don't know how many people watched that NTSB hearing, but our Met colleagues on the NTSB came back at our contract weather office here in Austin, Texas. They're in a second-story building, no windows. The contract weather observers cannot see outside. They're on the second story. They're not allowed roof out access. They cannot use their cell phones in the office because there is no signal in the office here in Austin. And still nothing has been done about this. And so I leave that with us today. I think this is something the FAA has got to look at, and I think is going to have to become a little more public. And if nothing else, by embarrassment, we'll get past this. But Jen, this really, as a METAR lover, and nerd is something that I just think is unacceptable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm without words. I don't know how you have an observation with where you can't observe anything. That I just don't. I don't know. It's just awful. So, Troy, you're spot on, and thank you for bringing up those points. And it is very concerning for sure. Something else that's very concerning is the next email, which is kind of funny when you learn who actually responded to this email today, because it has to do with social media, and the person who responded is not on social media, but had some great points. So we're going to talk about it here. But Charles wrote something about, I won't mention, I don't know if I'll mention the company. It just, somebody posted something about hyping, what appeared to be hyping a tropical system. And he said he received this on October the 12th. And, brewing major hurricane to strike U.S. Gulf Coast, the strongest of the season. He received that on October the 12th. And the person who responded was Neil, because he's not on social media, but he had some excellent points. And it's why he hates being on social media. But he says, we have a problem here. He goes, this post was from the Helene forecast. And it was posted originally on September 23rd. So there's issues on social media when, you're starting to follow somebody, you may see like a top post that comes up, and there are certain social media. I don't post real time anymore on Facebook, and Instagram's the same thing. Why? Because it'll show up in the feed 1-2 weeks later, and it makes it look like it's something that's happening now. And so I just thought I would throw it out there for everyone just to kind of discuss this. And this is, it's already difficult to message. This makes it a billion times worse. So, Kim, did you want to throw in some thoughts?
I did think it was interesting that Neil was the one who answered this. That was hilarious.
Yeah.
Hey, Neil has done the detective work on Instagram. Good job. But he saw it and immediately just thought, this doesn't seem right. This doesn't seem like something AccuWeather would be doing. And, we've talked about that on this show. I know, Span, you've talked about this a bunch. It is so hard to give a really cohesive stream of forecast information when the algorithms are just taking it and parceling it apart and throwing random things to people, and knowing that there is an increasing share of the public that's relying on these methods to access weather information. I can't even imagine how confusing it has to be because they're not receiving it in sequence. So, as we're talking about internal to the community, trying to make a more continuous stream of forecast information that evolves logically, builds on itself, and is more consistent and involves probabilistic information, we have got to get a handle on dissemination through some of these means. So something that like the timestamp hadn't been collected or hadn't been passed along with the image, and so he was just like, "That's got to be something more central." That is a fact in time in some weather service offices, and they'll edit text that accompanies a graphic, and they'll say this is old. All of those efforts, I think, are extremely worthwhile because until social media evolves to some other place, if it does, it could continue to devolve, if anything. But until it evolves it to a better place, we've got to come up with these patches. Otherwise, you're going to get a whole lot more of this. And so I appreciated Neil stepping in and pointing out this was old, but there are people who are looking at the tropics and waiting for the next one, and there'd been all this talk about there being another one that was a big. So it was frightening to see that come in our email. Thanks to the listener who tipped us off to that.
Yep, absolutely.
And the deal is, that's how people typically consume social media. It's the algorithm timeline that they receive. And I don't think that's going to change. And, maybe what we need to do is get just somebody with Meta and, list certain accounts that are critical accounts where they're whitelisted, where they see the content immediately. And surely somebody would be willing to do that for weather service sites, for some of the NOAA sites. You'd like to think that that's possible. I don't know. That do take the old maps and throw them out as current. But between all of this, it can be confusing. And again, you have to put yourself in the shoes of the average consumer. And they look at their phone and scroll through it, and they'll see stuff. And they don't have time to dig around and go to certain pages and go to certain websites and da 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 da. They just typically glance at that phone. And so we've all got some work to do. There's no doubt about it, Jen. This is a complicating situation here.
Thank you so much, Charles Fing, letting us know your thoughts. We appreciate it. Thank you for your emails, everybody, for your questions, your comments, show suggestions, email at weatherbrains.com.
So Neil is our hurricane expert. We've got, we're doing the show here on the 14th of October. And of course, we had Milton last week. And now we have Invest 94L, which is causing great weeping and gnashing of teeth after the, let me see, the new update should be out since I last peeked at it here. Last time I looked at it, they gave it a 60% chance of developing, and it's still 60%. And this thing will be toward the Greater Antilles, and the models are all over the road. Any thoughts on 94L? Anybody here? Neil's not here. We need a hurricane expert. Troy, you're the lowest latitude guy.
No way.
No way. Yeah.
Not. I saw that this afternoon, and immediately my heart just sunk for the people in the Southeast and people like that, just because they're so, they're so worn out with this stuff. And that was my first thought this afternoon. I vote no.
Yeah, there you go. Let's vote it down.
Yeah.
And again, the upper pattern is kind of iffy with this, and there could be some interaction with Hispaniola if anything develops. And I've seen that island tear these things up as they come through there. And but again, so hurricane season's not done yet. And other than that, the big story, it's the coolest air so far this season that we've already discussed. So let's move on to picks of the week. This is where everybody left on the show here has something that is cool, weather related. This can be a website, data source, any book, hardware, software. So let's just start with Jen. Jen, I bet you got something good for us. Go.
This during the middle of all the coverage last week, this literally took my breath away when I saw this tweet from Michael Lowry, and it was the tribute from the NOAA Hurricane Hunter aircraft who put in the Vortex data message a tribute to longtime radar scientist and researcher Peter Dodge, who passed away in March of 2023. And I actually found an article that explained a little bit more about who Peter was. And this was from ABC News. And Jeff Masters was interviewed. And he was a hurricane radar scientist and researcher with NOAA for 44 years. And flew 386 hurricane eye penetrations. And Jeff mentioned that if you do 4 penetrations through the eye, that's on a typical flight. That means he flew through on the order of the end. The line on the Vortex message was Peter Dodge, HXC SCI, 1950 to 2023, 387th penny. And that means hurricane scientist. That's the HXSCI. It was his 380, and penny is the eye penetration. And that just was so amazing. So they put his ashes in the eye of Milton. That's amazing.
Wow. That is absolutely amazing. All right, Jen,
this
thank
is a
you.
recycle
Rick
pick, but with all the interest in the
week.
tornadoes in Florida with Milton, I want to highlight again that the damage assessment toolkit viewer, where you can Weather Service has completed for tornadoes, looking through some of those Florida tornadoes from Milton, crossed a road, and this is the real name, Flying Cow Road. One of those tornadoes crossed. So you got to go find where it is. Use the DAT, go look for it.
No, can't make this stuff up. Wow. So my pick of the week, it's a post written by a television meteorologist, former television meteorologist in Jacksonville, Florida. And it goes through her process step back. And a lot of it kind of resonates with me. Just here's one paragraph from this blog post. Every morning, I wasn't waking up with a sense of gratitude for a new day. Instead, my first thought was, when can I sleep next? It was an awful mindset, but gosh, I was wearing myself way too thin. The rushing around, the pressure to be everywhere at once, the constant worry about the future. Would I even have the energy to make it to my kids' games, their recitals, and the big moments in their lives in the years down the road? In that morning shift, if anybody's ever worked a television morning shift, it's brutal. It's just brutal. and I've seen so many like her. But the name of the piece, it's The End of an Era, Prioritizing Mental Health and Finding Balance. And sometimes you can step away. It's okay to do that. And I just thought that was a good read. And a lot of people in the television business can certainly relate to that. Okay, Kim, give us a good pick of the week.
Yeah, well, amid everything that happened last week with Milton, we also had a big space weather event that everybody got to enjoy. Almost was a little refreshing after all of the disaster and devastation. I'm glad that that didn't take a sideways turn that it could have taken to make things worse. But I am going to be recommending a really neat aurora chasing cheat sheet that I saw floating around the aurora chasing community, which there is an aurora chasing community, and I love them. So they have compiled a really great cheat sheet of different data sources to look at and the key values to be looking for, just like a severe weather outbreak, to determine a great aurora, decoding the colors you can see. I know this event, compared to the Gannon event in May, there was a lot of blue and purple, a little bit more than what we saw with the Gannon storm. People were kind of wondering what's up with that. So it gives you sort of a comprehensive view of all of the cool things that are aurora borealis.
How do you join one of these aurora chasing teams? I'd like to be on that team. Yeah, that's outstanding. You know, JB Elliott, our old colleague, he wanted to be on a subsidence chasing team, and he was looking for one, and he could never find one. So anyway, that's great stuff. And I will say that the auroras visible at these low latitudes were just mind-boggling. Yep. With that geomagnetic storm. And a big shout out to the Space Weather Prediction Center for the heads up and their work. Kim, I know you kind of know what they do out there, but don't you think their products were just outstanding for that?
Oh, it was so good. And they did this unique thing where, you know how we all get excited when there's like a day 2 high risk. They did their sort of equivalent for the geomagnetic storm. They issue watches with an anticipated geomagnetic storm severity level, so they can go like G1 watch, G2, G3, G4. They went G4. They looked at what was coming in, and they thought, even based on the limited observations we have in space, this could be big time. And they gave us as much lead time as they possibly could to be ready for that, which was especially important for our core partners. Think about the fragile energy system, especially on the East Coast, that's dealing with the post Helene, trying to get power back up. So they took a bold step, and it worked. They met the forecast and did a great job. So yeah, hats off to the Space Weather Prediction Center.
And what do you call it? Swipsy?
Swipsy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Swipsy. Well, their products were just outstanding, and for those of us that do what we do, they were so helpful and timely and accurate, and it was just excellent. All right, Troy Kimmel, give us something good.
I'm kind of worn out, so I'm going to get the foghorn tonight, please.
Ooh, yes, I love the sound of this thing. Wow. So let's go to James Adelite. He's got to do the 9 o'clock news here in a moment, so let's get him in and out. Eyewitness News live, local, late breaking.
If it is, if it's news to you, it's news to us too. Kyle Binney, who is a transportation and GIS expert in Arizona and photographer, shot some great pics of the aurora with saguaro cacti behind in the foreground of that, and it's just an amazing shot. You should give him a follow over on X or Twitter.
X. Very good. We'll put up the links to all these pics on weatherbrains.com. Okay, Sean, we've stalled long enough. It is now your turn.
All right, thank you. I've got to give a shout out and mention my good friend, and I think friend of several folks here, John Morales in Miami. His heartfelt viral video that happened just as he was coming on air to give an update on Milton as it was rapidly intensifying, and it literally brought him to tears on air as he realized that it had dropped 50 millibars in, I think, 10 hours. It made NBC Nightly News. It was all over social media, and I think in addition to the the meteorological significance of that. There's the fact that it really put a human and to hear his unique perspective and help bring some of the larger underlying issues to focus was really well done.
Yeah, it was. And again, that was quite a week. And he's been doing it a long time. And he understands the market. He understands the people. He understands the potential impact. He knows better than anybody else. And that's why local is just so important when it comes to people that are dealing with these high impact events. Somebody like him that's been through it before. But that is a great pick. So, Sean, what else do you need to plug here? This is your plug-a-rama.
I don't really have anything else to plug at the moment. If you go read the list, find it online, go to your local library if they don't get it. Believe it or not, it's still being sold in Barnes & Noble. They still have newsstands. The local Barnes & Noble has it. I'm not sure who's buying it. Look at that. And if you want to know more about, see more what I've written, my website, SeanPotter.com. Check it out.
Awesome. Well, that's a good deal. Well, it's been a fun show tonight. We've got to tie this thing up. For those that are new here, we are typically on the air Monday nights at 8 o'clock Eastern, 7 on YouTube channel, youtube.com/WeatherBrains. But most of you listen to the audio podcast. However you consume this, thank you. If you want to get in touch with us, the email address, and it works just fine, it's email@weatherbrains.com. So on behalf of the entire WeatherBrains crew, I'm James Spann. Thanks for listening. Have a great week and God bless. It was a good shoe.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you all so much.
Great.
Really interesting.